Hello, hello. Uh-oh. Hello. We're back to the organic lives. We're out of town, so we don't have access to our typical setup. Okay, let's see. Mm. Oh, can you pass me that hair bow? It's like huge. Do you see? If not, there's one in the bathroom. Hello. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about the book Secure Love. Hi, Naima. Am I saying that right? Or is it Naima? I bet it's Naima. Hi. Okay, so we'll be talking about, hi, young speaker. Secure Love, create a relationship that lasts a lifetime. Do you, it's in the bathroom, it might be on the floor. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about this book. Hi, Monica. Good to see you. Hi, Teresa. Oh, good. Did you read it, young speaker? Or are you like waiting for my review to read it? Thank you. Oh, and can you bring me the coffee out of the fridge, please? Okay, Naima, got it. Thank you. You could just put it down, please. Okay. So today we'll be talking about secure love. This is actually not the first you scan through it. Okay. This is not the first book that we've read about attachment and relationships. It's maybe the third book, but this one has a specific focus on people who are in a relationship. The other books we've read were Attached, which is really about dating. So it kind of let us know like the type of people that you'd be attracted to based on your attachment style and the type of dynamics you can expect in your relationship. And we've also read a book by Sue Johnson called Hold Me Tight, which is kind of referenced in this book because essentially Julie was trained in the emotionally focused therapy model. And that is Sue Johnson's model, EFT, which is an attachment based way of approaching couples therapy. And so the difference between something like this and I would say like the Gottman's work is that I would say the Gottmans, they have the theory locked down, whereas emotionally focused therapy really talks about the why and why we are experiencing relationships the way that we do. And that focus is on um, attachment. So let's get into some of my highlights. I'll jump in. I'm curious if you did read it, please put your rating in the chat. I'd love to know what you guys rated it, 1 out of 5. And I'll share my rating toward the end, but I want to jump right into what my highlights are. Because as usual, I have a lot, and I'm going to try to keep this to an hour because you guys know I can get carried on. I can carry on. Hi, Mackenzie. Nice to see you, and thank you for coming. Okay. All right. So the main premise of this book is that all relationship behaviors are attempts to experience, maintain, gain, or regain closeness and security with our loved ones. And so that kind of reshapes a lot of things that we might experience with people we love, where it feels like they are behaving in a way where they're not being attentive, they're not being loving, they're not being understanding. And by reframing that to know that basically every single thing that we do is an attempt to regain closeness, it kind of helps to build a bit of empathy when you're trying to now turn from being frustrated with your partner to more so curious about why they are using this particular strategy to try to feel connected to me or to themselves. So, similarly, the next highlight is underlying every fight, argument, silent treatment, passive aggressive comment, and attack is an unmet attachment need. So, I'm going to turn this over to you guys. So, how many of you can relate to that? You know, being in a place where you might be arguing or giving the silent treatment, being passive aggressive or attacking. And you know, when you reflect, that it's actually something a lot deeper, but maybe you don't have the safety in your relationship or the comfort within yourself to really talk about that with your partner. And so that's what this book is aiming to do, which is to teach us how to be able to build with our partner. And I can share a little bit about my own experiences. So my husband and I, like, I started the book out with him. I didn't finish it with him, but we did both agree that we have a secure relationship. But that doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of times where, you know, we're having a hard time talking about something. We might use the wrong tone or the wrong word choice, and then you end up further exacerbating the issue. Luckily, in a secure relationship, you do have the safety to go back to something and say, okay, I didn't like how we talked about that. Can we try again? But if you're in a relationship that already feels very hostile, very unsafe, then it is going to be extremely hard for you to kind of go back to that conversation. You're going to be scared because it's like, what if it's even worse this next time around? Um, and I thought this was an interesting statistic in the book. She says at least 50% of the population has an insecure attachment. So she starts the book out about, you know, talking about how to identify your attachment style. And we're at a point, I think, in pop culture where most people, especially if you have any interest in psychology, if you watch this channel, you probably have some sort of idea what an attachment style is. You might even have some idea of what your attachment style is. But for anybody who isn't clear on that, I'm going to give a little bit of a highlighted background to give you guys an idea of what it is. So you have a securely attached attachment style and insecure. And I don't like to think of it as like either you're securely attached or you're insecurely attached. Even she says in the book, you've kind of fall on a spectrum. You might be moving more towards secure attachment. That's a question I get from a lot of my couples and a lot of my subscribers, even people in my daily life. They're asking, if I do have an insecure attachment, is it possible to heal that and become more secure? And the answer, according to this, is yes. And I also believe that. I've read that through a lot of books, and I've also seen that with my work with couples, and I've experienced it in my personal life, in my relationship, especially when the reason that you're dealing with insecurities is due to past relational traumas or triggers. When you're dealing with issues from relationship wounds that are causing you to feel insecure in your relationship, it is possible for another relationship or even the same relationship in a better state to help with your healing process, where you can learn to trust a person again, you can learn to trust yourself again. Those things are possible, but you do have to build a safe environment. So when we're talking about an insecure versus secure attachment, with insecure attachment, it's really broken into three categories. Now, again, I say it falls in spectrum. So you'll see people using combinations of these terms as well. But with an anxious attachment, think of yourself as being the sort of person who needs a lot of reassurance, a lot of validation. You might be a person who's been accused of being clingy, or the kind of person who really needs to be around and hearing from their partner in order to feel as safe as possible in a relationship. And what really makes it an anxious attachment and not secure is the fact that that partner might be providing you with those things, but you still just don't feel safe. Okay. And so with an avoidant attachment, that's another form of an insecure attachment. You are dealing with that feeling of really being uncomfortable with too much closeness, right? So maybe it feels really good at the beginning, but then when starts things start getting a little bit too serious, a little bit too vulnerable, you start pulling away. And this is interesting because what we find is that People who are anxiously attached and people who are avoidantly attached often pair up together. But what I thought was interesting in the book is that she actually says that next to being in a secure relationship, an anxious avoidant attachment is the second most likely to succeed, which is super interesting because a lot of times you hear like that pursuer distancer dynamic is causing relationships to fumble. Your relationship is crumbling because one of you is constantly wanting more and the other person is pulling away. But she says that's actually the second most likely pairing to be successful because they can balance each other out. So if you are in that sort of dynamic, don't be worried because there is a possibility that your relationship can thrive simply because you guys are able to balance each other out. We just have to create a safe environment for you to be able to do so. Okay, and then the last type of insecure attachment is disorganized attachment. And this is the one that is most linked with trauma, particularly complex or chronic trauma, where you basically experienced a lot of unpredictability with your caregivers. So you might have a tendency to cling, but you also have a tendency to withdraw. And she does make a distinction that it is not the same as having an anxious avoidant attachment style. It's not a combination of the two. But I do think that she didn't do a great job of explaining why that is the case, right? Because it does sound like a combination of anxious and avoidant attachment. So I did wish that she explained a little bit more. Um, and it is important also to know that a disorganized attachment is not always associated with trauma and unresolved trauma, but it is often. Okay. Mm-mm. Okay, so here's an example of what it might be like for you to be in a disorganized attachment. Um, and this is on page 57 if you're following along with me. Those with disorganized, oscillating, and anxious attachment styles share a fear of abandonment and rejection, the need to keep partners physically close, frequent dissatisfaction in relationships, and behaviors such as protest and making demands. At the same time, you might find that soon after you pull your partner in, you have the urge to push them away, as if they need you, but I know you're going to abandon me. So I'm going to abandon you before you can abandon me. But wait, I need you, come back. Right? So it's that push and pull. So if you're in a relationship with someone where it's like they keep running hot, then running cold, running hot, running cold, there's a chance that they might be dealing with a disorganized attachment. Like I said, even though you're not always talking about trauma, often people who are dealing with disorganized attachment do have a trauma background. Okay, so let's go back to the highlights. You guys know how I can get with these highlights. I'm trying to stay on task. But if you have thoughts as I'm going, feel free to read them or share them. I'm happy to read them and change the course of the conversation if we need to. Okay. Mm-mm. So I thought this was really interesting. Is that also with the disorganized attachment is that you might recognize that your triggers change. So there are triggers you're experiencing one day, and then you're not experiencing that same trigger the next day. So your partner has a very, very hard time keeping up, right? So it's like yesterday, you didn't have any problem with me taking 3 hours to text you back. Why is today such a big issue? This wasn't a problem before. And you might think, yeah, it wasn't a problem before, but now it is, right? So that's another sign of disorganized attachment is when your triggers are changing and the things that bother you one day don't bother you the next. Oh, young speaker, I know. Okay, so I explained at the beginning, but let me explain again. So I'm not home, so we don't have access to our typical setup, and I'm so sorry about that. If you have the page, I'll try to make sure I read it so you can find the page in the book. And also, I think we're going to put in a link for anybody who wants to get the book. Some people literally buy the digital book in the live, but we'll add that to the chat as well if you want to get the book if you don't have it. I'm sorry about that. I know it's funny because I'm so low maintenance with these lives. I'm like, we don't need all that. My husband is the one who's like high tech and hates when we don't have it, so he's gonna love that somebody said that they miss having the pages and stuff on the page. I'm sorry, young speaker. I know it does. We didn't expect to be out of town, but we found out yesterday that we needed to be, and we ended up having to fly like on a late like red eye flight. So I'm sorry about that. I don't want to change the date since I already told you guys a month ago this is when we're meeting, but I appreciate your patience. I know it makes it easier to follow along. I mean, I could possibly show it on my Kindle, but I have a feeling it's going to be flipped, so I don't think that's going to really help. I'm really sorry about that. I don't even know like if it's possible to share my screen on here, because if so, I would be able to do it, but I don't think so. Let me see. Oh, it does share screen. Okay, give me a second. Give me a second. Let's see. Thanks for doing this with your last minute travel plans. Oh, Monica, of course, I love talking with you guys about this. I really look forward to these. Um, I just was like, I don't know what to do, but yeah, okay. Thanks for bringing that up, because I think I actually can share my screen and show you guys my notes. It won't be as fancy as usual, but at least you can see what I'm reading. But you guys will also see how many highlights I have and how many I have to skip to try to get through these. Um, mm, mm, mm. Triggers you one day may not bother you the next. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to take a risk with you guys and share my screen. I'm gonna share this. You only have one open. Okay, can you guys see that? This is cool. Sweet. This is cool. I didn't even know we could do this. And then you guys get a little heads up of what's coming up. I can see it. Perfect. Okay, great, great, great. Thank you guys. Okay, so we're in the money. We got a little bit of a visual. Okay. So I thought that it was interesting. Part one, she talks about understanding your attachment style. So that's the part one, understanding your needs section. Part two, she talks about understanding how you have conflict and how to repair that conflict. And I thought that I liked the way that she talked about the different ways, or the different cycles and traps that we fall into, because I see these with my clients all the time. One thing I will say is that I realized that she and I are very similar in the way we approach therapy, especially couples therapy, which is interesting because I'm not really trained as an emotionally focused therapist. So to see that, even without that training, a lot of us are using similar approaches with helping couples to process what they're working through or dealing with. I thought that was really, really um, insightful to see that we have a lot of the same approaches. And it's funny because I saw a lot of the same critiques that I have for myself with her, and that's why I'm sharing my rating at the end, because I was just like, I feel like this book was kind of like looking in the mirror for with myself as a therapist, and trying to really reflect on like how realistic are the tools that I provide my clients with. When you're in the room with your client, it's a lot easier. But when I'm, helping people online, in this capacity where I can't hear what you guys are saying back, I always want to be cognizant about what's realistic and what's actually helpful and what's going to be harder to implement without somebody in the room with you. Okay, so let's jump into what some of these negative cycles are. Who's the bad guy? And I'm not sure how many of you can relate to this. I absolutely love that she broke this out this way. Who's the bad guy is such a common blame trap, and people come into couples therapy all the time with this at the forefront of their mind, which is, I want you to basically tell my husband or tell my wife she's tripping. Like, I want you to figure out what's wrong with them and help them to fix it. And I always tell people, if you're here because you believe that one person has a problem, that one person needs to be in therapy, right? And you also should be in therapy, but individually, not together. Because if you're here as a couple, we need to be addressing the issues you have as a couple. What is wrong with the cycle and the pattern that you're dealing with together? Okay. So then the next one is, who gets hurt worse? And this one is where you're trying to find who's the bigger victim, right? It's like, oh, you think you're having that problem? Well, what about what I'm dealing with? Oh, you're stressed at work? How stressed do you think I am at home with with these kids, right? So when we're at that point too, again, when you're in these places, what you're basically saying is, I don't care about your pain. I don't care that you're overwhelmed at work. Look at what I'm dealing with. I don't have the space to be empathetic with you. I'm also overwhelmed, right? So when you are looking at it from a position of trying to match your partner's pain and see whose is the worst, you're really missing out on an opportunity to be curious and understand what they're dealing with. And that's one of the main focuses of the book, is being able to hold a space for empathy, being able to find a place where you care about what your partner is going through. And not only do you care, but you're interested in what you can do to help alleviate their pain, and hoping that maybe one day they'll feel the same about you. But when we focus so much on how to fix our partner, we miss a lot of opportunities to work on ourselves to improve our relationships. Yes, Pain Olympics. Monica, I can remember. Are you also a therapist? Because I feel like you probably get it. Like, definitely dealing with couples. Sometimes this is like, sometimes you go through weeks of sessions, and this is what you're dealing with. Oh, you're in therapy. Okay, so you're coming from the other side of the expert perspective. Love that. I love that. The Pain Olympics, absolutely. Okay, the miss. This is when the couple gets caught in a loop of misunderstanding each other's intentions. And I actually really liked this example, so I'm going to read it. So you have Jaden and Francis. They're in a negative cycle. When Jaden feels let down, he often tries to reach Francis, who hasn't historically been responsive to Jaden's concerns, with questions that are thinly veiled criticisms, right? So things like, I have a feeling you haven't already walked the dog, in which case that says that you're irresponsible, right? And then he says, can you relax? Right. And now Francis feels like he's basically telling her that she's overreacting. So what happens is, like, she's basically trying to say, I know you. And before I get disappointed and assume that you did walk the dog, I'm going to go ahead and brace myself and assume that you didn't. Right? That is what she's really trying to do. She's trying to guard against that feeling of disappointment. And then when Jason says, or I'm sorry, not Jason, when Jaden says, can you relax? What he's saying is, oh no, like he's saying, I feel this is about to escalate. This is about to get to a point where I can't fix it. I can't do anything to make you happy, right? So when he gets to that point, he's like, please calm down. I do not want this to get worse. But neither one of them is hearing that, right? Both of them are hearing, you're criticizing me. You're telling me that I'm irresponsible, and you're telling me that I'm overreacting. And this is a perfect example of how couples can misunderstand each other and really miss the attempts their partner is making at trying not to feel rejected or abandoned by themselves or by their partner, right? Most of the time, we're doing things to avoid feeling like a failure, right? So she doesn't want to feel disappointed by believing that her husband may have walked the dog, and he doesn't want to feel like he's a failure because he's allowing this conversation get to a point of being escalated and turning into an argument. Okay, Cheyenne says, I had to talk with my husband when we were newlyweds because we had different communication styles. Yes, I mean, like, my husband and I are the same. Actually, I remember getting back from the honeymoon. Now, mind you, we dated for 6 years before we got married, but we never lived together before we got married. And so, anytime you're like moving in with somebody, there's an adjustment period. But then when you have those expectations of what marriage means, it makes it 10 times more intense. And so I can't remember what it was. Like, I saw something on YouTube or Instagram, and I feel like a girl cut her hair, went bald or something, and her husband loved it. And I was like, my husband wouldn't love that if I cut my hair off. And I was shocked. I could see in his face that he was not amused. And if you know my husband, he is like very, very slow to be upset about anything. He's like, you know, the man is a saint, right? So I was looking at him and I was kind of confused, like, did he hear me? And he got so upset, like he he stormed out the room and ran down the stairs, and I was just like, what happened? And so what he heard from me is like, we just got married and you already are comparing me to other guys and you think I don't love you, which I was just making a comment on the fact that he's always made it clear that he loves my hair. So I know he wouldn't want me to cut it all off, but he heard me basically saying that he doesn't love me as much as some other husband might love his wife, which was not what I was trying to communicate. But he was feeling so much pressure just getting married and wanting to be a perfect husband that I had to realize what bothers him at this point is anything I say that might insinuate that he doesn't love me. And that's really not a problem, right? Because he shows me love, so much love every day. So all I have to do is make sure that I'm communicating that I'm receiving that and I'm accepting it and I'm appreciative of it. And that's not a problem for me. So when it comes to communicating with your partner, sometimes it's really important to understand their triggers. For him, he doesn't like to feel like, um, he's being blamed for things. He doesn't like to contribute to my pain in any way. So if it feels like I'm experiencing some sort of, annoyance or aggravation, and it looks like he might be a part of that, that really triggers him and makes him nervous because he doesn't want to be a part of my problems. So being very careful with my language and my tone is something that I learned to do as we've been married now for almost 9 years, is that when it comes to him, he wants to know that I see how hard he's trying to show me how much he loves me. And so learning your partner's communication style and learning their specific triggers is so, so important. And it's like, it's easy to think, I'm not like that. So what's wrong with you? Right. But that's a shame mindset. That's saying something's wrong with you because you're different from me. Like, I don't need that validation because I know he knows that I love him. Like, I don't need that. But at the same time, I didn't grow up ever questioning if the people around me knew that I loved them, and he may have. Right. So you have to be very, very understanding that you and your partner come from different backgrounds that can contribute to very different triggers. Cheyenne said, yes, it's so different. It is so different. Can you relax? Yeah. Yeah. Calm down. Can you relax? All of those things are absolutely fighting words. But, part of this work is learning not to fight because somebody has to be the person to break that cycle. Somebody has to be the person to realize, ooh, typically when they say that, I get triggered. Typically when they say that, that's when I really turn up, right? Can you relax? Oh, babes, you thought I wasn't relaxed before. You're about to really see me not be relaxed, right? That's where your mind might typically go. But what you want to do instead is say, what can I do to break up this cycle that we typically have? And instead, you might say, okay, old me might have went off on that. But what I'm hearing you say is that you're worried that this conversation is we're about to take it too far. It's about to be escalated. Is that what you're saying? And that gives your partner an opportunity to kind of reframe or rephrase what they're saying so that we can actually hear them and not just be triggered. Okay, so she also talks about the importance of taking a break. Now, that's the thing, is that sometimes, we don't want to take a break. It's like, no, let's address this, especially if you have an anxious attachment style. It's extremely uncomfortable to sit with those negative feelings. You want to resolve it because part of you is worried this is going to be the final straw and they're going to abandon me and they're going to reject me now. So you want to address it. You can't sit in the silence. That worry, that concern about what they're thinking, how they're feeling could really make you have crippling anxiety, right? But in actuality, sometimes that break is what is needed so that you're both able to reflect on what the issue actually is and talk about it in a way that's safer than you'd be able to do in the moment. That's something we had to learn as well with my husband and myself. He's the kind of person that prefers to talk in the moment. He's like, he doesn't like the idea of like, okay, like you're upset with me, you're mad at me, like, and I don't know what I did. How can I fix it? Like, that really makes him uncomfortable. But me, I know how I can be. And if I want to, I can really use my words to hurt. And that I don't want to hurt him. Right. So I'm like, let me make sure I take the space I need so I can calm down. My intention is never to further your pain, right? So what he learned over time is that that break is important. When I just walk out of the room and I'm like, give me a few minutes, now he does that no problem. But when we were first together, that really, really made him nervous because he's like, because I'm a talker. So for me not to be talking can be scary. That could be a little bit unnerving. So over time, you learn like, okay, this is how my partner most safely deals with conflict. Let me give them that space that they need. So taking a break, I think, was a very, very useful tool. Here are some of the phrases she used that I thought this was a phrase that I thought was really helpful. As you can see here, there's a list of things that she, suggests you say if you want to take a break. So you guys can take a look at these. The one that stood out to me that I really loved was, "I love you more than I love this argument." How real is that? Like, if you really take a second to think about what you're arguing about, half the time it's something really unimportant. It's something where by the time my couples come to therapy, like the next week, I'm like, what was the argument about? And they have to take a second to sit there and think about it like, what was the argument about? They don't remember because it was that inconsequential. It's the principle behind the thing. It's the feeling behind the thing. It's the trigger that was erupted because of some phrase that was said in response to the thing, right? Like in that example before, they were talking about like walking the dogs, right? But the argument really became about somebody saying calm down or you need to relax. That's what the conversation became about, but really we're talking about walking the dogs. So I love that phrase, "I love you more than I love this argument." And that's one of the things I will say about this book. It was extremely practical. She gave a lot of suggestions on exactly what to say. The end of the book literally is like, if this is your situation, here's some things to say. If this is the situation, here are some things to say. And I thought that was really useful, very, very practical. You don't often see that. Okay, let's see what you guys are saying. Young Speaker says, "If I don't talk in the moment, it builds up and it's going to cause resentment." That's totally fair. Young Speaker, I'm not sure if you're in a relationship or not, but if you don't mind sharing, is your partner also the type of person that likes to talk in the moment, or does that present as a problem for you guys where you're wanting to talk and they aren't? Because if your partner also likes to talk in the moment, you don't need to take a break. You guys are both on the same page. It's more so when you have one person who needs to take a break and one person who doesn't want to. And when we talk about taking a break, and she talks about this as well, it's not about like, let's bring this up in 3 weeks. It's usually, let's talk about this in an hour or maybe 20 minutes, right? He likes breaks. Okay. So, one thing that I encourage my couples when it comes to taking breaks is to make sure that if you are asking for that break, that you're giving your partner a timeline on when to come back. And she talks about that in here as well. So, making sure that you say, you know, I need a break. Can I get 20 minutes? Or like, let's take an hour. And an hour is really going to be a very, very short period of time for resentment to build up. Resentment is typically going to build up when we're not resolving our issues, we're brushing them under the rug, and we're not trying to figure out any solutions. That's when resentment builds up. You might feel some disappointment that we're not talking about it. You might even feel some anger and frustration, but resentment is a bit more of a long term feeling. It is a major issue that can happen in relationships. So make sure if you are taking a break that you guys are communicating how long that break will be. Naima says, "My partner talks when he wants to, but I don't want to talk then." Okay, so how do you feel, Naima, about asking for a break? And have you explained to your partner when you guys are outside of a conflict? Have you explained to him that, I am the kind of person who really benefits from a break and I want to be my best self for you? that sometimes requires me a little time to think so that we're not arguing. I love that phrase. I love you more than I love this argument. I think that's helpful. I wonder if any of these phrases on here, if any of the other ones stand out to you guys. If so, put that into the chat. I found these default phrases are really useful. It's like pulling out an olive branch instead of more word knives. Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Young Speaker says, I have figured out we can't have heavy conversations in the car. I love that. Yes, I love that because you've identified a confining situation that does not work well for you guys when it comes to dealing with conflict. I'm huge with that with my couples is identify the situations that further the trigger, right? Sometimes it's a certain noise level, sometimes it's being around a certain person, right? I had a client tell me yesterday, I don't like when my husband asks me what's wrong when we're with the kids. That's totally valid, right? Because they don't want to be in a position where their kids first of all know something's wrong with them, when they're not even sure about why, or B, if they do know what's going on, they don't want their kids to know what's happening. So that is a perfect example of understanding what your limits are and trying to communicate that to your partner and saying, I found that we really don't do well talking about difficult conversations in the car. So do you mind if we bring this back up when we get home? I love you. This conversation is important. I just don't think this is the place to have it, right? Reassuring your partner that I'm not trying to get away from you or this relationship. I'm not even trying to get away from the conversation. It's the setting that I think will do more damage than the conversation itself. That is really great self awareness, young speaker, and I love that. Okay, so let's keep moving. I'm so glad that we're able to share the screen. That helps me a lot, and I'm glad you guys have a visual as well. Okay, so when we got to this page, I'll just say, like, when she talked about the negative cycles, because behaviors like criticism, cynicism, stonewalling, defensiveness, and accusations should be replaced with curiosity, empathy, understanding, and validation. This is where I feel like it's very hard these days, in my opinion, to write a couples book without referencing a lot of the work that the Gottmans have already done. And that I'm not to say that they invented these things. I just think that they have popularized a lot of them. For me personally, I can even read Stonewalling without thinking about the Gottmans. So whenever that's why sometimes like books like this for me, I'm like there are a lot of practical elements, and I love the very specific manual she has with saying certain things. Kind of wish she would have stuck to that in the book because I think the practical aspect of this book is what made it really special. I feel like a lot of this stuff was kind of like, as a person who's already doing this all the time in my relationship and like talking about it with my clients, I found it to be a little redundant. But I do think that if you're totally new to this, you might find this additional information to be really helpful. So you guys will see this stuff and decide for yourselves if it's something that'd be worth your time to read, or if you've already read it, let me know what you thought of it. Yes, this is very important and key. Remember that the overriding goal is to express your position and feelings, not to get your partner to agree. And this is the problem that I see a lot of times with my couples is that it turns into like a court case. Like you're trying to prove your point, you want them to agree with your point, and it's I tell my couples all the time, if we all walk out of here today and you're just as firm in your position and you still don't understand your partner's position, we all lost. The only way we win today, the only way this is a good use of any of our time is if you walk away with some understanding about how your partner feels and why they feel that way, right? That is the goal, is to understand. You want to be able to communicate your point, and it feels really good for your partner to understand it. They don't have to necessarily agree. And so that isn't super important too, is like we're not trying to convince our partner to be on the exact same page with us. Okay, Naima says, I never asked him for a break. I never thought about asking for a minute or some time, but I don't want us or me to resent each other. And I think my advice with couples too is like when you are talking about how we talk about our problems, the best time to do that, my belief, the best time to do that is when you are outside of a conflict. And the pushback I get from that is people are like, I don't want to ruin a good moment. We were having a good moment. I don't want to bring up anything about conflicts we've had or how to talk about conflicts. But the problem is that when you're already heated, you're already elevated, you're already in the middle of a negative cycle, it's very hard to step back and see the forest from the trees and say, hey, have you noticed this pattern when we talk about things in the car? For example, things get really escalate and we have no opportunity to get out and take a walk or get a breath, get separate from each other for a little bit. It's hard to do that when you're in the middle of the conflict. So it is better to bring it up outside. So for you, Naima, you might want to talk with him and say, I know we're having a great day, and there haven't been any issues. I've just been reflecting a lot about how we deal with conflict when it does arise. And I think we would benefit for like if we take a little break, because for me, I need to gather my thoughts and I don't want to say anything that could make it worse or anything that can make you think I don't love you or I'm not committed to this relationship. So is it okay if we like practice 5 or 10 minutes break, if we're having an issue, and see what he says about that? When a person is not actively triggered in the middle of a conflict, they're a lot more likely to be agreeable to suggestions outside of the norm. So they might be like, yeah, that's not a problem. Now, in the moment, 5 minutes might sound like a lifetime, but outside of the moment, 5 minutes sounds very, very reasonable. So I'm trying to bring it up and see what he says. Cheyenne says, I used to think that if he didn't agree, he didn't love me. I'm glad I'm past that point now. Right. It's so freeing. It's so freeing when you don't have to like be a lawyer and convince somebody to see life the way that you do. Naeem says, I love your advice. Thanks. You're welcome. I'm glad that you're finding it helpful. Okay, so let's keep moving. We're doing good today. Oh, I loved this. I loved this. So, one of the things is that a lot of times we get into a space where when we're trying to have healthy conversation, you know, we keep saying the same thing over and over and over again, right? And so, in that same section where we just talked about making sure that you're able to express your position and feelings and not just to make your partner agree, that's another section called clearly delivering your perspective. And I loved what she talked about is when we get to that point where we are saying the same thing over and over again and we're not coming up for a breath of air. If your partner's doing that to you, practicing saying, you're repeating yourself, and that tells me that you're worried that I'm not hearing you. How can I show you that I'm really listening? How often does that happen, right? Where somebody's repeating yourself or you find yourself repeating yourself. You're doing that because you feel like they didn't really hear you the first time, or maybe you're losing track of what you're saying. And so I thought this was a very gentle way of saying, hey, you've been saying the same thing and I hear you. Can I repeat back to you what I've heard? And you can tell me if I'm hearing it correctly. That way you can feel the freedom to move on. Okay, so let's move on to the next highlight. Mm-mm-mm. Yes, this was important too. Apologies are more meaningful when you take the time to understand how your behavior impacted your partner, right? So you can say, I'm sorry. You could even try to adjust your behavior, right? Like maybe they're like, you never make breakfast. And so you just start making breakfast, but you really don't understand why that's a problem, right? So the best thing you can do is to make sure that you're communicating back to your partner the problem that you're hearing. So it might be something like, what I'm hearing is that you feel like when I'm getting up in the morning and I'm about to start my day, I'm not thinking about you. And is that why you're wishing that I could make you some breakfast to let you know that I thought about you when I got up earlier than you this morning? Making sure you're clear on why something is a problem is extremely important if you're wanting to help your partner see how much you care. And so I know a lot of this is like, well, what about all the problems my partner is doing, right? But that takes us right back to that beginning, right? Who has it worse? We want to focus on what we're able to work on, because I tell my clients that all the time, especially when it's individual therapy. I'm like, unfortunately, your partner is not my client. I've never met them. I wouldn't be able to pick them out of a lineup. So if I focus on everything they need to be doing differently, what good does that do you? Because they're not hearing it. And they're not going to hear it from you when you're just telling them how they need to behave. All we can do is work on your end of things. And the great thing about most relationships, it's only two people. If one of those people is changing, the relationship is going to have to change, right? That's half of the equation that's changing. So the relationship is going to have to change. Your partner will notice, like, wow, okay, normally you would have blown up. Like, they'll get a little nervous, like, what's happening? You're acting a little differently, right? So once they realize that something is shifting, there is nothing they can do but act differently because they're getting cues that they're unfamiliar with. So learning to work on your end of the toxic cycle or the unhealthy cycle will benefit your relationship. Or if not, at least you'll see I'm putting in the effort, I'm putting in the work, and you'll have more clarity that maybe this relationship is just not sustainable for me. Okay. When your partner is open with you, I thought this was good to say, to see too, that show appreciation that they were willing to share with you, right? These are some of the things you can do to make your partner feel good when they're vulnerable. If you feel close to them as they share, you can tell them how close you feel. You don't have to immediately jump into apologizing or explaining yourself. Something else she talked about that, she talked about the four different ways that we respond to triggering situations, and they all start with an F: fight or flee, which we're all familiar with, which is fighting or running from the situation. Freezing is one that has been added in more recent years. And the most recent one I would say is fawning, which is where you start trying to immediately appease your partner. And so here, or appease your partner in a situation where it's like an actual threat or whatever, you're trying to, like, let's say you're kidnapped, like Stockholm syndrome of being example of fawning, because you are basically trying to get on your captor's good side subconsciously so that they won't harm you, right? And a lot of us jump into that immediately, that appeasing way of dealing with anxiety, stress, and fear. So sometimes if our partners bring a situation up to us, our first thought is, let me immediately apologize. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm going to do it again. But we don't really understand what the problem is. We don't understand why we keep doing it. We don't understand why it's a problem for them. So before we jump immediately into apologizing or explaining ourselves, we should try to first understand why it's a problem and see, do I agree that that's what I'm doing? Maybe you don't really agree. Okay. Hold their hand or make another physical connection, validate, it makes so much sense. You make so much sense. I understand your feelings. I understand you. Keep it short and simple. You want to, when you're responding, you don't want to try to turn it over into making it about you having a long monologue. You want to understand what they're saying. So that requires them to keep talking so that you can see what they're saying. I also thought it was very interesting as she was talking about the different ways that we respond to triggers, is that with the four different types of triggers, you think about the opposite version. If your go to is one version, the opposite version of that is basically the healthy version of that for you. So, for the example, the opposite of fleeing is freezing. So, if you're the type of person who typically is avoidant and runs away from conflict, right? Wait, the opposite of fleeing is freezing. I think that is right. Yeah, you're the type of person who runs away from conflict. Then what you want to do is practice freezing. So you want to practice just staying in the moment, giving it a second before you bolt, before you run away, before you shut down, giving yourself a second to pause, take a break, see what this person is saying or what's being done. And the same thing for the opposite. If you typically freeze, you just stand there, maybe what you need to do is walk away from the situation. Maybe you do need to get a break. Maybe you need to leave for a second. So when you know the opposite of fighting is fawning. So if you're typically the kind of person that's going to jump in aggressively, you're saying a lot of like mean words, you're cutting them down. Maybe, this is a good opportunity to just praise them a little bit. I really appreciate you for sharing with me how you feel. That means a lot. Or if you're the opposite, if you jump automatically to fawning and just saying, okay, I'm sorry, you're right, I'm so dumb, I shouldn't have done that, jumping instead to being assertive, you know, fighting back a little bit and saying, you know what, I hear what you're saying, but I don't like that you called me dumb. I don't think that that was appropriate, and I'd like for you to try to find a nicer way to speak to me when you're upset, right? So I loved that. I thought the whole thinking about your go-to method and doing the opposite, I think that is really, really healthy. Just to think about, how can I continue challenging myself to be more present and more vulnerable when I'm dealing with conflict? Okay. Did that make sense? If you guys have any questions about that, let me know because I know it's a little hard without a visual aid. Mm-mm-mm. Okay. Now this was really interesting. Something I actually hadn't heard about before, which is healthy guilt. I have actually only ever heard of guilt in a negative light. And so when I read healthy guilt, I was like, healthy. But I thought this was interesting. Healthy guilt, basically guilt feels bad and can contribute to our desire to not repeat the same mistakes, right? So we might say, "Oh, I feel bad that, I wake up and make breakfast and I never think to make anything for my spouse. Like, let me not do that. That's not a good feeling. I feel like I'm not being my best spouse, being the best partner I can right now." That's healthy guilt. Bad or unhealthy guilt is I am wrong. I am bad. So if I take from that, wow, I'm a terrible wife. That's not healthy, right? Because I'm taking one aspect of my relationship with someone and I am magnifying it and making it the sole aspect of my relationship. So I loved that. It reminds me a lot of healthy anger. So I don't know why I didn't think about the fact that, healthy guilt could be a concept as well. What do you guys think about that? Do you believe in that healthy guilt? Oh, I missed something. Cheyenne said, I always tell my kids I don't want to hear I'm sorry. I want to see a change, but either way, I still love you. I love that. And I think also, I'm sorry has its place. It is important to hear from a person that they care enough to apologize, but it's more important for them to understand what they're apologizing for. So even with our kids, right, to say, okay, you're apologizing. What are you sorry for? Why do you think that that upset mommy? Why do you think that made me upset? Would that make you upset if you were in my situation? Helping to teach our kids empathy is important as well because, as children, we really aren't offered a lot of opportunities to think outside of ourselves and really ask ourselves, how does this person on the street feel about this situation? You only want to do it to a certain degree. I don't think it's healthy for a kid to be carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. But I do think it's healthy for them to be thinking about maybe their classmate who's crying and asking themselves, would I cry if I was in a similar situation? I think that's healthy. Monica says, yeah, I think guilt makes it so that we feel we can change, but shame makes the ick feel permanent and hopeless with regard to change. I love that. And I've always thought of it as guilt is about an action and shame is about, character flaw, right? Like I am a bad person. You're right. So I think that that still might be, if you look at it that way, then health, guilt and saying I am wrong, I am bad is still probably wrong because that sounds more like shame. Thanks for that clarification, Monica. That's a good point. Okay, so let's see. We're getting towards the end here. Let's see if there's anything else that I really wanted to highlight. Okay. So I'll just say she did talk about some of the real world considerations, which I thought was helpful. But because it was so like big topics, like she talked about dealing with chronic trauma or addiction. I thought that it was really just not enough space to talk about it. But I did love that she provided a lot of resources, like she shared some podcasts, like foreplay sex radio. That's helpful if you're dealing with sex issues in your relationship. She talked about a lot of different book recommendations. She talked about the Dear Man approach for if you're dealing with an issue. The Dear Man approach is like describe the problem, express how it affects you, assert what you need, reinforce, be mindful of staying on topic, access confidence, and negotiate. I won't go too into detail about the Dear Man um, concept. This is something I learned when I got trained in DBT, which is dialectical behavioral therapy. And it's a lot of that is just about interpersonal relationships and how to, effectively communicate with people. DBT is like it's very specific, but it's also very broad. So, Dear Man is a huge, important aspect of that. I loved this suggestion for how to communicate with your partner when, you might be tempted to get really short with them and, um, you're frustrated with them. Instead of taking your anger out on them, try saying something like, I had a bad day and it's hard for me to be present right now, but it's not about my feelings toward you. I just need some time to decompress. How many arguments could be saved if we were able to communicate to our partner? I know I have an attitude, but it's not about you. Please believe me when I say that. Like sometimes, the formal language is one thing, but if you just talk to your partner the way that you would talk to them typically and just say, I know I'm not being my best, but I'm in a bad place. I think that's really, really helpful. And so this whole section at the end is like, when you're feeling grumpy, here's what you should do. When you're feeling, if your partner's feeling grumpy, here's what you should say. If you need to set a boundary, here's what you should say. So I thought that was really good. This is at the end of the book. So you guys might want to read through that if you have the book. Um, I did like some of these things. This was a really good way of measuring progress. It says a lot of times security in a relationship is less about what you do feel and more about what you don't feel, right? So it's like sometimes it's hard to even realize your relationship is progressing because you're just like looking for this specific feeling, but it's less about that and it's more like, wow, I'm not anxious to have conversations with my partner anymore, or I don't find myself walking on eggshells. I'm less angry. I'm less resentful. I just feel normal. I just feel normal. And so I think that was really good reframing too when you're like looking for some big fireworks moment to show that your relationship is healthy. And instead to just be like, okay, you know, the thing that I'm noticing is that we're just not even having to talk a lot about our relationship anymore. It's just working. Like we don't have to talk about it all the time. We're just living. We're just enjoying life together. Okay. Young speaker says, what if the partner says we have so many differences when I bring up a different way of thinking, they threaten the relationship? I think that's a great example, young speaker, for you to be vulnerable and share what you hear when they say that. Because it sounds like what they're saying is, I'm nervous that we have too many differences to make this relationship work. And you're hearing the same thing, which is, I'm nervous that you're saying that you're unwilling to work on this because we're just so different and you feel like we might not be able to make this work, right? So vulnerability is being honest about like what you just said scared me. That made me feel very uncomfortable. Like, what do you mean by that? Are you saying that you think we're too different for this relationship to be successful? I think that's a great opportunity to just be open about what you heard them say. Take a pause to just respond to what was said and how it made you feel. Monica said, I really liked her writing about anger, a lifelong journey for me for accepting anger as healthy and how to express it in a healthier way. A lot of us came up in households where anger was absolutely looked down on. I liked how she talked about how vulnerability looks different for everyone and how you might think just because you cry a lot that you're being vulnerable. But if you grew up in a household where tears were acceptable, then it's like that's not really vulnerable because you were always taught that was safe and okay. But maybe in that same household, you were penalized if you show any anger. Now, if you show your anger, and then maybe that's vulnerable. Maybe if you admit that you're scared, maybe that is vulnerable. And so I thought that that was a really, really great way of making sure that people don't confuse tears with vulnerability. Okay, you guys. So that is, we're at the end of the book here. I'm so glad I was able to actually share my highlights with you guys. I'm going to do a quick poll because we do have to get out of here. But I want to know again what type of book you guys want us to read. Okay, so we're going to do self help. Then I'll break it down even further. Memoir and novel. And if you guys have book suggestions that you would like us to read, go ahead and put those in the chat at this time as well. If you guys have suggestions, we also in the Goodreads group, we have a section in the general section called like book recommendations or requests. A lot of times I pick our books from there. So, definitely let me know if you have a specific request there, if you don't feel comfortable putting it in here. Okay, right now, self help is winning. What did you say? Oh, you weren't seeing it? Okay. Yeah. Some of the books that I've been seeing and thinking about for the book club. I have a shelf called Book Club Potable. If you're my friend on Goodreads, you can always get an idea of what I'm thinking about. Um, for some of the self-help books that I have, um, the book you wish your parents had read and your children will be glad that you did. You're not listening, what you're missing and why it matters. Sex Talks, the 5 conversations that will transform your love life. Drama Free, a guide to managing unhealthy family relationships. The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. Bearing the Unbearable, Love, Loss, and the Heartbreaking Path of Grief. And When Things Fall Apart, Hard Advice for Difficult Times. Some of these are books that I've seen you guys on Goodreads reading and giving good reviews. Some of these are books that my clients came upon that really have helped them with their journeys. That's specifically for if we do self help. There are a lot of memoir options as well, depending on what type of memoir you guys are wanting to read. Let's see. So, right now, yeah, self help is winning by a lot. Um, mm, so I'm curious, what are the top 3 things to shift into a secure attachment and how long does it take? So how long does it take is just not a simple answer. Top 3 things, I think the main thing that she's saying in this book is that you want to make sure that in your relationship, you are creating a safe environment for safe conversations. So you do that by validating your partner's perspective, being vulnerable about your perspective on things, and then also being open to other interpretations of what's happening around you. So sometimes we have a go to understanding of a situation like they're criticizing me, or they're blaming me, or they're about to abandon me, and being open to other possibilities like maybe they're tired, or maybe they misheard me. Giving your partner the benefit of the doubt is one of the things I work with my couples on a lot. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. Self help, is winning by a lot, y'all. You just bought Let Them by Mel Robbins. Okay. A lot of people. Okay. So we've already got 2 people saying that. So should we just make that the book of the month? I'm going to end this poll. Should we just go ahead and make that Let Them? Okay. I'll read you guys what that book is about. I've been seeing it a lot of places. It just came out this year. Okay, the Let Them theory. You know what? I forgot I can share my screen with you guys. I love this. I feel like this is new, right? Uh, I love this. Oh, I'm currently reading Let Them. It's great so far. Hi, Keisha. Oh my gosh, I've missed you in here. Have you just been lurking? That's so fine if you have been, but I've missed you in here. And I've seen you in some of the lives. So thank you so much for being in the premieres of the other videos too. Okay. The Let Them Theory. Okay, so we've got quite a few people already vouching for this book. Okay, it has a 4.10 on Goodreads. What if the key to happiness, success, and love was as simple as two words? If you ever felt stuck, overwhelmed, or frustrated with where you are, the problem isn't you. The problem is the power you give to other people. Two simple words, let them, will set you free. Free from the opinions, drama, and judgments of others. Free from the existing. Oh, can you guys not see? Can can you guys see my screen? That's okay, Keisha. I go MIA all the time, no judgment. Okay. Okay, free from the opinions, drama, and judgment of others, free from the exhausting cycle of trying to manage everything and everyone around you. The let them theory puts the power to create a life you love back in your hands. And this book will show you exactly how to do it. Okay, so you guys know that I do books. Typically, I choose books by people who, are licensed in therapy or, psychiatrist, psychologist. Mel is a defense attorney and entrepreneur. So we'll see, we will see like from the therapist perspective if it's in alignment with the things that we talk about. I'm going to give you guys the reins this time. We're going to go with this book. I wouldn't normally pick it for the club, but I love that you guys have um made the suggestion, and it was, as you could see, it was already on the list of books that I wanted to read anyway. So this is what we're going to read. Our next meeting is going to be in October. For anybody who's new to the book club, this is a book club that meets every other month, typically on the last Tuesday of every month at 7 p.m. Eastern time. I'm going to go ahead and put the link for the group here if you wanted to join on Goodreads. We have, you can always see what book we're reading there, and you can also find um, a list of all the previous books and the previous lives as well on there. And so this is a great way to stay updated on what's going on with the book club. Okay, you guys, so we actually have a reservation and not too long. So I'm going to end this, but I love talking with you guys so much. I appreciate you. Thank you for being vulnerable and open with me. I know it's not easy, like getting on a live and sharing things happening in your relationship, but I try to be vulnerable with you guys too, just so you know, I don't have it all figured out, so this is not me always coming as an expert. Sometimes it's just me coming as a living person who's dealing with her own relationships as well. So thank you guys. Oh, did I get you gave rating? That's my husband. If you guys know, it does, it keeps me on my toes. I didn't get my rating. This is hard because when I share my highlights, it makes me want to rate it a bit higher. My initial rating for this book was actually, I'm not gonna lie, it was 2 stars. Um, just provide empathy and validation so it will be secure. That is a lot of it. I would encourage you to actually read the book yourself, young speaker, if you want like more in depth. I know that that is like a highlight, but I only get an hour for these. And even if you listen to the book, it's at least 7 or 8 hours. You ask for the top, those are the top. When it comes to building a secure relationship, it happens over time, and it really does require that both you and your partner be committed to changing the dynamic that you guys have already established in the relationship. And I know that is frustrating, to not have something that's a little bit easier, quicker, more tangible, but it does happen over time. You have to essentially repair what's been happening in the relationship if it's not feeling secure. But keep in mind, if you have an anxious attachment, if you have an avoidant attachment, and that's who you're paired up with, that's actually the second most successful type of relationship according to this book. So it's not that the relationship is doomed to fail. It's just that, you have to recognize that there are strengths that come with each of those types of attachment that you can use to help balance each other out. creating a safe environment in your relationship can definitely help with your security, but you want to build a secure relationship with yourself. Also, biggest recommendation is if you need professional support, definitely being in therapy and working through the things that might be triggering you and highlighting insecurities. I think that's going to probably be more effective than any live could be, than any book could be, is having that tailored support for what you're working through. Okay, so our next meeting, the date is October. Is that Halloween? Because if it is, I'll change the date. No, it's not. Okay, so October 28th will be. Oh, there is a possibility that I'm going to the Jonas Brothers concert. So let's move it up. We'll do October 21st. And that's going to be at 7:00 p.m. Eastern. So you guys join me to talk about Let Them by Mel Robbins. I will see you guys soon. Take care. Appreciate you. Bye.